All right, hey everybody. I'm Matt from Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews, and I'm here today with Travis M. Riddle, author of On Lavender Tides, which is part of a new series of his titled Jekua, which is a new Pokemon-inspired, low-stakes progression fantasy. Thanks so much for meeting with me today, Travis.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Of course. So before we get too much into the book itself, I wanted to go kind of some of the basics about you and about kind of reading in general. So what do you do outside of reading for work, and what do you do in your spare time?
In my spare time, I mean, it's a lot of reading, a lot of video games, a lot of movies, TV. I consume probably an unhealthy amount of media of all types. I mean, that's probably the main hobby, I guess. It's just consuming stories and then
Yeah.
writing stories.
So what kind of books do you like reading? What are your favorite authors?
I mainly stick to like sci-fi and fantasy. I used to be a real big like literary fiction dude in like high school and college, but I kind of veered away from that. Every once in a while I get into it, but it's like mostly sci-fi and fantasy. Um, I think probably favorite authors like I really like Josiah Bancroft's stuff.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've read the books of Babel,
Yeah,
but
I've read the first three so far. Haven't gotten to the
yeah,
last one yet.
yeah, I really like that series and just like his style in general. I really like the DP Williscroft's work.
Mhm.
He writes the Wildfire Cycle
Yeah.
book. The first book of that's called King's Hold. Trying to think of who I've read lately that I really liked. I guess one more I really like is Gareth Hanra Hanrahan. I'm not sure how to say his name. I probably messed it up, but he wrote the Gutter Prayer and that the whole like Black Iron Legacy series,
Yeah, I
which
haven't
I
heard
think
of
is
that, but
really,
I'll have to check it out.
yeah, it gets very weird and nasty, which is the kind of stuff that I like.
Awesome. So you mentioned you play a lot of video games. What kind of video games do you like?
Really everything except, well, I don't know, not everything. I don't really like MMOs or like roguelikes or anything like that, but mainly like single player stuff just because like I kind of mentioned I'm just really into stories, so I need
Mhm.
like an engaging like storyline. Right now I'm actually playing a like Pokemon clone type game called Koromon that just came out a couple weeks ago, I think.
Yeah, it's still
So
in beta, right?
I think it like just came out of
Okay.
beta. Like the first like full release just happened at like the end of March maybe. So I put a few hours into that over the past couple days, and it's been pretty fun. It's fun playing like a Pokemon game where like all of the monsters are like complete surprises to me.
Yeah,
You know,
when I finished reading your on Lavender Tides, it kind of made me think like, man, I haven't played a Pokemon style game in a long time, and I started looking up like what's out there, and that game popped up.
really, yeah. It seems like people are liking it, and I think it's pretty cool so far, but I'm not super far into it yet.
Awesome. So, what were your writing influences when you were growing up?
Writing influences. Honestly, I think really a lot of my influences haven't been writing, but more so like games and movies and
Mhm.
stuff. Like some of the first things I ever wrote when I was very young, like in middle school or something, like the first novel I tried to write was like a novelization of Final Fantasy IX.
Mhm.
um, and when I was even younger than that, I was making like a hybrid like book slash like comic thing, a book with like illustrations, and it was basically a ripoff of both like Samurai Jack and Osmosis Jones somehow. Um, so stuff like that, and like even now, a lot of my stuff is like obviously the new series is highly influenced by Pokemon, but I've also had a lot of like Final Fantasy influence or like Yakuza or Dragon Quest. So really like video games are like the biggest influence I think for me, and especially like Final Fantasy, which I've been playing since I was in middle school
Awesome.
and still am today.
So, I was reading on your website, and you wrote this interesting blog post quite a while back that I wanted to ask you about, and it was
Hmm.
probably a few years ago. But you wrote this interesting post about like the guilt and the feeling of pressure that you get from having to stick to like a continual schedule.
Hmm.
Can you expand on that a little bit? And do you still feel the same way?
Yeah. In like the self-published writing community, more so than like a traditional sort of route, I feel like there's always been this like behind the scenes authors kind of talk about how like to like gain and then maintain like an active fan base, you basically really need like a high churn of people reading like a bunch of books. Because if you just release one book and then don't release anything for like a year or two, it's hard to like build that momentum. Because like even if you have like a bunch of sales at the beginning and get like pushed up in like those Amazon rankings, it kind of dies away eventually. And because I mean, people are always just looking for something new and something exciting. Um, People tend to talk mostly about new releases, stuff like that. You're not really, unless you're like a huge name. I mean, people aren't really talking about stuff that came out like 6 years ago, like all that often. Obviously, they are, but not like to the extent that like a hot new release is. And so there's always just been this like it's always just always been stated that like really like the most successful authors are the like lit RPG authors or like progression fantasy or like even like romance authors who churn out like I don't not churn out. I feel like that's a negative connotation, but just like release like multiple books a year, like even like 4 or 5 books a year, or just like one thing every month, and that just keeps people on the hook, basically, just buying constant new releases, constantly being like on bestseller lists and everything. Um, and so there's always been this pressure of like if you're not releasing stuff fast enough, then you're basically going to be forgotten about. No one is going to really care about what you're doing. They're not going to really come back when you finally do release something because it's been so long. Stuff like that. And then even beyond that, just like literally on like a financial level, like you need like a ton of books out there to even have a chance of like making a living off of this, because the sales of like one book is not really going to get you there. But if you have like 25 books that people are all like buying constantly, then maybe you have a chance. So that's kind of, I think, what I was getting at there is just this pressure of like, you cannot really be a success unless you're putting out a ton of content all the time. Um, and I mean, there still is that pressure for sure. Especially like in the progression fantasy subgenre where it kind of is expected. Like so many stories in that genre are like serialized, like on Royal Road or other sites like that. Or even if they are like just released on Amazon, like the authors are putting out chapter by chapter, or like volume by volume so quickly that the fans kind of expect stuff to come out very quickly, or else they're just going to move on to the next series that's pushing out a bunch of stuff. Um, and so I knew that going into this, and that's kind of why like I did like start to write the series early last year, and so I've been like building up a backlog of the books before I even like I was almost done a draft of book 3 before I released book 1, because I wanted to be able to like take that pressure off of myself a little bit, to where like I know I wanted to release 2 books every year in the series, but I didn't want to like finish one and then release it and then feel that pressure like, okay, now I have to like sit down and quickly write the second book, or else people are going to get mad, they're going to be impatient. This way I release it and then the second one's like already basically done, so I can kind of relax and like work on something that's going to come out in like a year or two, so there's not like as intense of a time pressure to get it done.
Yeah, that's smart. Yeah, I remember reading Will White, and his Cradle series is immensely popular right now. he
Yeah.
kind of mentioned before that he has to have at least a book out a year to be able to make it.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
pressure is huge.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And I
So
don't,
on the subject of self-publishing, if you're published, it comes with like an editor that goes through this whole process with you. You don't get that privilege as a self-publisher. So what's your editing process like, and how do you get that job done?
yeah. I mean, there are tons of like really good freelance editors out there. That I know a ton of people who work with them. And I've done that with a few of my books also, but a few books ago I kind of got out of the habit of it, mostly due to at the time like a financial thing
Mhm.
where like that part of the process like costs a lot of money. And especially if you have a longer book, it costs more money because they charge like by the word basically. An editor does. Um, and I mean they do good work, so it's not like it's not worth it. But at a certain point, like if I'm not making the money back from releasing the book, then I have to think like, should I be putting that money like into it? Um, and so like I majored in like writing and like editing and stuff in college, so it's not like I don't know this stuff. It's always great to have like another set of eyes on it and someone whose like sole job is that. But I mean, I feel fairly confident that like my books aren't going to have like a ton of like typos or anything in it or like a ton of like grammatical errors. Obviously something might slip through. I'm not perfect or anything, but yeah, I felt confident enough that like I would not embarrass myself by by releasing something that like I edited myself. And so that's kind of what I've been doing for the past couple years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes sense. And I mean, it's not even like major book releases don't come with some of those errors either. You
Yeah.
can pretty much always find at least one somewhere in pretty much every book that you ever read. Just
Yeah.
slips
Yeah.
in. Although I don't remember noticing any in yours. So good job on
That's
those.
good. Yeah. I mean there's always, I don't know, the stigma is always that like self-published books are like lesser than traditionally published books. And so like you said, even traditionally published books have errors in them, but for some reason it's like a grievous sin if you like find one in a self-published book. Like all of a sudden, like this author's an idiot, this sucks, it's unprofessional. But like I won't say what book it is, but like the book that I have ever seen the most errors in ever in my whole life was a like traditionally published book in the past couple years. So I mean, like, I don't know, it happens. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm reading this big book right now. Author's not really big, but Brian Lee Durfee. He,
Oh yeah,
he
I think I've heard
and he
him.
he writes this really epic fantasy series called The Five Warrior Angels, and it's traditionally published. And man, I've found at least 5 or 10 pretty grievous spots in it that
Yeah, yeah,
just I never care. It's kind of fun for me to find them. But
yeah,
I
yeah.
can see
Me too.
why some
Like
people might get upset.
sometimes I think it's kind of goofy that like an editor missed it, but like it doesn't make it doesn't make the book worse for me.
Sure. Cool. So jumping into this book in particular, so it's obvious that the inspiration for this book's come from Pokemon, and you even went to the hilarious level of dedicating the book to Charmander, which I thought was very funny.
Uh-huh.
So why did you decide to write this book, and how long have you been thinking about doing something like this?
Well, I don't know. I just kind of got to thinking at a certain point, like a year or two ago, that like I think it was around when like Pokemon Sword and Shield came out, and I was playing that. And I mean, they're fun still, but where the Pokemon games always lose me is that the stories are like almost non-existent. The
Mhm.
story is basically not ever more than like you need to go here, and so then you go there, and that's about it. And then you fight people along the way. Um, so I don't know. I usually don't ever even like finish the Pokemon games these days because I just get I get so bored with the story and the gameplay can only bring me so far. Um, but then because of that I started to think like, well, this is like the biggest franchise in the world, and I find it very odd that like so many people have grown up on these games like me, and were obsessed with them and still are obsessed with them. And yet there's like no real like other media that's like inspired by it. Like there are the games that people make like Koromon and like Temtem and other stuff that are like Pokemon-esque games. But I found it weird that like there are a bunch of books with like Final Fantasy influence or like whatever else, but there's never been like a Pokemon style book that I was aware of besides like one or two things. And so I decided it might be fun to try to write a story like that. Basically, take a Pokemon game, but like give it a real storyline with like actual characters and stuff. And then around that time, also like the progression fantasy subgenre was kind of like blowing up in popularity. And as I started to like outline the series, I realized that 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 Pokemon style, like pretty much basically like perfectly slotted into like a progression sort of thing. So it seemed like a natural and obvious pairing to me.
Yeah, when I was reading your book, pretty instantly, when things start flowing, I had that same realization. I was like, how is this? How has nobody done this before? It feels
Yeah, I
so natural.
it's very weird to me that it hasn't happened. I know there are a few more like Monster Tamer books that are like on the horizon now that I've heard about now that I put this one out, but I'm surprised it hasn't been a thing for like a decade already.
Yeah. So how do you come up with the different Jekua characters that you've written about here? A lot of them are pretty unique and fun to read about. I mean, have these just like floated in the back of your head, or did you just, when you're outlining this book, you started from scratch?
Yeah, a lot of the times it's just like I get to a point in the story and I'm like, okay, I need a new one here. And I start to kind of think, I like think back about like, because there are like 10 different types or whatever, like elastic and sonic and thermal and stuff like that. So I kind of think like, what have we not seen in a while? And I try to like lean toward that. So there's like a good variety throughout the series. Um, and then once I decide on a type, then I kind of try to think about like what kind of like animal would maybe like make sense to use like a power like that and like what ways in nature they might actually use that power. Because one of the things that like does annoy me in Pokemon is stuff where like the ones where like it's a Pokemon that's like an ice cream cone or like a Pokemon that's a set of keys or whatever. Um, or like a big sword that flies or something. So I really wanted like all of them to be like believable as like animals in the world
Mhm.
that just happen to like be able to do magic stuff. So I wanted like with the Juntus that are like these elastic monkeys, they like swing from trees like monkeys do, but what they can also do is like elasticize the branches when they grab them.
Mhm.
And so they basically like spring themselves off of the branches and then extend like these like very thin wings that they have like on their arms, kind of like a sugar glider, and like fly through the forest and stuff like that. So just trying to think of like things like that where I can kind of justify the power that the animal has. And then sometimes also it's no more than thinking of like a stupid pun that I like. I'm not really like a pun sort of person, but sometimes there's one that's just so stupid that I think I have to use this. Like there's I guess I won't spoil it, but there's one in the third book that is like it's just the dumbest little thing that I've ever made in any book, and I'm very excited for people
Yeah, I
to
can't wait to read
read
it.
that one.
So I want to be careful not to spoil anything here, because I really want people to go out and read this book. I think it's better if you kind of go into it a little bit blind, without understanding too much of the details. I think you'll have a better time. But there's some significant differences between Pokemon and Jekua and the way that the Jekua are captured and the way that they battle. How'd you come up with those system changes? Because for me, they worked really well in a literary way. I thought
Hmm.
that it really translated in a nice way. So, how'd you come up with those?
Um, well, like a lot of things, it always starts with like a problem that I'm trying to solve, and the problem being that typically in Pokemon, it's basically making like animals fight each other until they
Mhm.
pass out, which is not great, really.
Yeah.
And it was not something that I wanted to like perpetuate in this story. Because I mean, it's not even like morally ambiguous. It's just like bad. And so I did not want to write a story about that. And so I thought, so I had to think like, well, how can I still have this, um, but it not be dogfighting?
Mhm.
And so then I figured, well, maybe it's like not the real animals. It's just like copies of the animals that are like summoned. And so then from there, I kind of thought like, I thought it would be fun. Like if they're making copies of these animals, I mean, it's kind of goofy and kind of fun if it like they actually get stored on like memory cards, like data. And then that's kind of like my Pokeball sort of thing. That's where I
Mhm.
can like set that limitation where like you can't just have like a million things imprinted. Like you have to buy these memory cards, and some of them have like data limits. So you have to like get a bigger memory card for like a more like powerful monster. Um, and yeah, that's and then that also tied into part of like the progression question of it all, which is like, well, if they're just doing this, then like I don't know, it seems like very like overpowered. And so then that introduces the whole mana aspect of it,
Mhm.
where basically the whole point of the progression, or one of the points, is being able to like deepen your mana reserves and like how much mana you can use at any given time. And that also adds like a gamey aspect to it where you have to use a certain amount of mana to summon a monster, and then like every movement costs mana. Getting hurt damages your mana. Using attacks spends mana. Um, and yeah, I thought that would be a good way to kind of introduce it. It makes it feel more. It's I think that's what helps with the balance I was trying to strike of like feeling like very nostalgic for Pokemon. So it like brings you back to like that video game kind of feel with it, but while still being like its completely own different thing. So it's not like just it's not like a blatant ripoff, but like it has like those elements of it that like kind of like bring you back and feel familiar to you while still being surprising and different.
Yeah, I think you did a good job at it. And for me as a reader, I read a lot of stories of people fighting each other. But having this mana aspect and these different things going to it, it's fun because you have these other side things you have to worry about as a reader,
Right.
when you're
Yeah.
concerned about these characters. So your brain's kind of doing this multitasking thing when you're reading these fights go on. So it's really fun. Adds a fun dynamic to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned it a little bit before, but let's get a little more specific. How planned out is this series? Have you outlined this whole series from start to finish, or are you kind of doing you write the next book as you get inspired to write it? And then how many books are you thinking about writing?
Yeah. So before this, I'd only written one other series, and before that, it was all just like standalone books. And standalone books are much easier to plan because you got the beginning and the end right there. Um, but I realized that with a series, um, I could not really start writing anything until I like knew exactly where I was going. So I kind of had to think of like the entire series as like one long story. Um, and so before I started to write the first book, I kind of planned out like what all the major events would be throughout the whole thing, and like what the ending was going to be, like what the major overarching story was going to be. So the series is going to be 6 books long. And so before I wrote the first book, I planned out like in which book these various major plot points are going to happen in, and like what the setting is going to be, what like the atmosphere of everything is going to be. So in some cases, like what like progression milestone are the characters going to hit in each book. Um, but then beyond that, it's kind of like a book by book basis, where then like once I start to write the book, that's when I'll go in and do like the full detailed outline, like chapter by chapter. And sometimes there I'll like add in new elements that like I hadn't thought of before, just because they like kind of organically crop up, where like if I know like chapter 2 has this event, but then down here I know like chapter 12 is like this big plot point that I had planned, I kind of have to like figure out the steps in between there. And so sometimes just other like new characters or like new subplots or something will kind of crop up in that part of the process. Um yeah, so like right now I've written the first 3 books. And I now have like my chapter outline for book 4, and I think I'm going to start trying to write that tomorrow actually. And then for like 5 and 6, I know like how they're going to start, how they're going to end, and then I have like just some general notes of like cool like set pieces or something that
Mhm.
I think I might want to include in them if I can figure out like a natural way to fit them in. But I won't like actually plan them until I'm getting ready to write them.
Cool. So at the end of this book, you did this kind of cool thing where you thanked another author. I think his name's John Berce,
Hmm.
the author of the Mage Errant series, which is
Yep.
I haven't read it yet, but it's extremely popular in the progression fantasy world.
Yeah,
Um,
it's very fun.
so how did you get connected to this author, and what was the relationship between you two?
Um, how did I connect with him? I think he like read one of my books several years ago and like messaged me just saying like, hey, he liked it, stuff like that. And like I had seen his books on Reddit also, and I had read some of them and I liked them. So I told him that. And we've just been chatting for several years and became friends. And so we both like beta read each other's books, um, and help each other out with that aspect of things. And so when I told him that I was planning to do like a progression fantasy series, which, like you said, he's a pretty big name in that community, he got very excited and actually like wanted to help me like plan out like the magic system and everything. Um, so like I came to him with like a lot of like the ideas that I had with like the mana and the device that they use and the memory cards and everything. And then I sent him like this big long Google Doc of like the whole magic system that I planned out with like all the types and the rules and stuff like that. And then we got on a Zoom call and we just kind of like chatted through it for like an hour and a half, with him like offering ideas where he thought that I could like tweak some things to make him a little stronger, or things that he thought that should just change completely, or stuff that he thought was perfect and should not change. Yeah, so that was like the main uh piece of guidance that he gave me, was like ironing out the magic system. And then
Mhm.
after that, um like I said, we always beta read each other's books, but now he's kind of become my like alpha reader for this one, because I know how both voracious and vicious the fans of the subgenre can be, and so I really wanted to not like screw up the book and disappoint them and have everybody hate it. So I sent him like a super early copy of the first draft and was basically just like, "Tell me if this sucks. Tell me if like genuinely like is like the progression part of this like satisfying for a reader of this genre," because that was like the biggest fear I had. Like I've written plenty of books, so like I feel like I have a kind of a handle on like stories and characters and stuff, but like the actual progression part of it was completely new to me. Um, and so he read through it and he gave me some advice on that part of it as well. And so now he's like my alpha reader on this series. So I once I finish the first draft and revise it a little bit, I send it to him before I send it to any of my other beta readers, just to basically say like, "Hey, um, tell me, is the progression good? Does any of this make sense? Does it feel natural?" Stuff like that, so I can iron all that out before I let anybody else read it.
Awesome. Cool. So that's all the questions I had for you. I thanks so much for meeting with me, Travis. I wish you tremendous luck in this in the writing world. Love this book. I'm gonna pick up your other ones and check them out too. And I look forward to reading the rest of the series. It's been really fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. Awesome. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.